with Lieutenant Colonel Lee Smith. He was a P-47 pilot during World War II. He served in the 366th Fighter Group, 391st Fighter Squadron in the 9th Air Force, and he was initially based at Thruxton, England, before moving over to the continent after D-Day. So tell us your story, Mr. Smith.
Well, from the standpoint of air, being a pilot, when I was a little kid, even aircraft mesmerized me. I seldom did you ever hear one, but if you did, you ran out to see what it looked like. And my father would take me out to the airport once in a while, and I can remember when the first, I guess it was a DC-3 that came in, all shiny, and as it turned around, the co-pilot opened the window and stuck a little flag out here that said Tulsa on it. But aviation was getting into my blood, only I didn't know it at that time. The one thing is my dad, when I was 3, held me up so I could see Lindbergh when he came to town, and they had a parade for him. Another thing was, I think it was named the Graf Zeppelin, and as near as I can remember, it had 4 engines, 2 kind of up front and 2 kind of back. And an autogyro. I'd never heard of the thing, and I was in the 2nd grade when it went over. And all through my teenage years of growing up, air was on my mind, and I knew that there was no way I could pay to learn to fly. And I tried getting into TU. I graduated from Skytook High School, and TU held a, I guess you'd call it a contest with all students that wanted to come in and take part in the program, and the winners got their tuition paid. Well, I didn't make that. Along about December, after I'd graduated, my dad ran a little lumber yard and hardware store in Skytook, and I was sweeping out the front, and I heard the radio say Pearl Harbor is being banged up, and I went back and told my dad that. He was doing some figure work, I guess, and he said, no, they wouldn't do that. But he found out that they would. And I'd been working in the First National Bank as a gopher, go for this, go for that, something else. And the fellow that I was working with on the line said he saw in the paper where they'd reduced the requirements for aviation cadets from 21 years old to 18, and from a year in college to being able to pass a written test. And that mainly was it. Well, of course, you had to pass physical. And as soon as I could, I applied, because I turned 18 March 1st, which was a couple of months after anyway.
Pearl Harbor, was it?
Yeah.
Months after Pearl Harbor?
Yeah. At any rate, I came through the written material stuff, and the sergeant says, well, just wait, we'll let you know. And they did later on. Went to Oklahoma City and got sworn in. And there were several of us being sworn in, but they separated 3 of us out. And the only reason I can think of was that we were all 18. And the rest of them were older than that. I never saw the picture. But eventually the call came through to, let's go. And they sent me to Nashville, Tennessee for classification, where they had different types of written material as well as physical things to do to see what you might be qualified for. And several of us qualified to be a navigator or bombardier or pilot, and you got to choose. And I chose pilot because I'd always wanted to fly. From there, we went down to Montgomery, Alabama, which was more or less training of sorts. I mean, learning code and the rules and regulations and that sort of thing. Got through that all right, and was sent to Clarksdale, Mississippi for primary training. Well, that was the prettiest airplane I'd ever seen, and the first one I'd been up close to. Bi-winged airplane, mostly wood with some type of cloth. I never found out what it was, but stretched real tight. the instructor had 5 students. I was one of his 5. He was getting ready to take me up for an orientation ride. And he says, now I want to tell you something. He said, if I say jump, you jump. Because if you say, huh, you're going to be talking to yourself. And then as we were flying along, it was a beautiful day, and I'd never been in a place where I could see so much all at once. Open cockpit and the whole schmear. And pretty soon he picked up the Gosport, which is nothing more than a funnel with a rubber hose running back to your helmet. And if you goofed up flying with him, he'd hold this out in the airstream so that you'd get a bunch of air. At any rate, he said, where's the airport? Airport? I don't know. And he tilted her up on a wing, and it was right below us. And I'm sure he did those things with every cadet. From there, we went to basic training, which gave us a metal airplane, a single engine, a low wing, Vultee aircraft. And we called it the vibrator because in a spin, from the top down to the right, it'd just shake all over and then kind of smooth out as you came back up again. And anytime you spun it, you got the vibration. I was setting out at the end of the runway, getting ready to take off on a little training mission, and there was a plane coming in for a landing. Of course, they have a right-of-way. And as he came on down, I saw him, and it looked like he was really uptight on this landing. And this was the first part of the programs where you were learning to land and fly by yourself. And he let that thing, it hit the runway all right enough, but kind of rolled off slightly to the left where they'd been working on something. And he clipped a cement mixer and ran through some sand and a fence and got that thing back in the air. Well, we all know that the word for SOS is Mayday, and it's a couple of French words. I don't know what they mean, but that's what they use instead of hollering SOS, Mayday. Well, this kid crammed her up and made a turn down for the downwind leg, and he said, Maytag, Maytag, Maytag. Well, they washed him out.
Got a little rattled.
Went on to advanced training, and we had more instruments. They uncovered the whole panel so we could see everything that was there, and learn to fly those dudes. And we would have a guy come with us to fly on instruments, and we'd pull a hood over to where we couldn't see except for instruments. And I qualified in all of that aspect. I qualified as expert on air-to-ground and air-to-air machine gunning from your AT-6. And let's see, that was mainly it. Just more information that you could get from your aircraft and how to handle it, and so forth. And from there, then they shipped 18-year-old running all over the country. I'd never been out of Skytook except on a 15-cent bus to Tulsa. And here I'd been on I don't know how many railroads. Where am I going? And went out on Long Island, New York to some outfit, and they sent me back down to Washington, D.C., and they then sent me to Richmond, Virginia for training in the combat aircraft, which was the P-47. And this is a mean piece of machinery.
There's the P-47 there. A little bit of glare.
Yeah, a lot of glare. Let me get out of there.
Okay.
It had 850 caliber machine guns. It could carry a 1,000-pound bomb under each wing and a 500-pound under the belly if your target wasn't over 3 blocks away. But otherwise, they filled it with gasoline. The thing did use a lot of fuel. It had a 2,300 horsepower engine, and turning a 19-year-old loose with something like that I turned 20 while I was over there and before the D-Day. And the work we did there was anything that moved, let it have it. And we were loaded with bombs, and if we saw any tanks, whatever we saw that moved, bang it.
That was on D-Day?
D-Day, yeah. And there were a lot of ships out there. From there, from England, we moved to landing strip A1, which was the first strip, I guess, that was completed. And it ran between Omaha and Utah beaches. It was up on the cliffs that you've seen in pictures of the cliffs with the rangers climbing the ropes. I went down to that end and I saw those ropes. And one of them was just a rope with pegs through it. And the other one was like a little ladder. It had 2 pieces of rope with little pegs through it. And how the guy with all that stuff on him and whatnot could handle that one, I'll never know. Never know. But from there, we started helping the ground forces. And we would be called out for fighter strips where maybe they were trying to advance. We had a lot of help for Patton. And I listened to one of his prayers one time, and there were at least 3 or 4 references to "let us have the fighter bombers."
Did he use SOB in the prayer?
Yeah. And it's strange. I was on leave in Paris, and it was kind of evening-like. I was walking along the street, and somebody came up along this side and says, "Sir," says, "do you fly P-47s?" And I looked at him, and it's a young enlisted individual. And I said, "Well, yes, I do." He said, "Well, we guys want to thank you guys for the help that you give us." And that was real great. In fact, he wanted to give me a P-38 German pistol. Wow. And I told him no. I said, I asked him if that's the only one he had. He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, you better keep that. And later on, you can let someone have one if you get another one." From the combat standpoint, there are things that happen that you don't know what the results are. One of the trips, I was in charge of the squadron on a deal to reduce 3 different areas. Well, that's fine enough. That's 36 airplanes. What we had was the artillery individual had phoned us that there was a German overlook calling ammunition shells in on them, and they wanted that guy wiped out because he was telling them, yeah, a little more, a little less, or whatever. And I took my flight, the 4 of us, to do that. To get there, it was amazing because we were above the cloud layer, and the cloud layer was just like this, no holes hardly at all. Once in a while, a little hole would come along, and managed to find the town in the first place, and helped them. I called for smoke, and they put one up, and I could see the smoke. And I wasn't sure if what was ahead of there, they couldn't reach it with smoke, of course, otherwise they wouldn't have needed us. At any rate, I called for one more shot, and he was a little bit perturbed of having to do it again, I guess. At any rate, the 4 of us went into our dive. I waited till a little hole was coming along, and then we went down through that dude and dropped our bombs. And as I was pulling back up, the guy on the ground that I'd talked to about smoke and whatnot, he said, "The first one got it." And the other 2 flights I took to their targets, and they knocked them out. And the worst part of it was the weather. It took a lot out of you to know what it's like and what is it underneath and so forth. You can take the halts out.
Sure, yeah, I can do that.
Uh,
I was just going to ask you a question if you don't mind.
Yeah.
How you talk about the air-to-ground communications?
Mhm.
How did that work? Were there problems with that? Was it pretty good? Was it
How'd you coordinate that?
How'd you coordinate that sort of thing?
No, it's pretty good. In fact, they generally put pilots out in front of the group that's moving along because they could tell the pilots in their own language what to look for and what's bothering them.
So you had pilots on the ground
Oh,
traveling
yeah.
with the units,
Yes.
calling back up to his buddies in the
Yeah,
sky.
yeah, right.
Did you guys have that? Did you guys have people in your unit? Or did you guys have people in
So did you ever
Did you guys have
go on any of these missions where you were on the ground with the units?
No,
You were never in that situation?
no. The thing of it, the thing that surprises me is that here I was 20 years old, and as the time went on, I'd started out as a second lieutenant, as a 19, and
There he is at age of 19 as a second lieutenant. Good-looking
Pilot.
young guy. Pilot.
and I became an element leader. A flight is 4 aircraft, and this is number 1, which is the flight commander. Number 2 is his wingman. Number 3 is the I can't think of the word. At any rate, he has a wingman also. So a flight consists of a deal, and you see them flying around like this all the time when they're in formation. In combat, most of the stuff I don't recommend. It is just daily bombing or strafing or anything to help out the people on the ground. And they would establish reconnaissance missions, go out and see if you can find something. And that sometimes got a little hairy.
Do you remember your first time you flew a P-47?
Yeah,
Could you describe what it's like when you got in the cockpit of one of the most powerful fighters of World War II?
well, in Richmond, Virginia is where they trained the jug jockeys, and a jug is a word that's used with P-47s because they look like a jug when they're turned up on their nose. Some correspondent guy says, "Oh, it stands for juggernaut." what a crock! And I think he's the same one that said, well, for someone asked him what D-Day stood for, and he says, well, departure. D-Day is like H-hour. You know, it's set up to be a point of reference. Some of the other things, I got into a little bit of a bind one time. My flight commander, we were coming back from France to England, and we were at about 10,000 feet or maybe a little more. And there's always a cloud layer over England, and you had about 800 to 1,000 foot clearance in 99% of the cases. Well, instead of coming down under and making it easy to fly, he barged right into the middle of that, and I didn't have my instruments uncaged. You keep them caged unless you're going to need them. And I thought, well, I'll just fly his wing by sight. The only trouble was it got so thick I couldn't see him. And I knew my prop was right there by his wing, and I thought, well, I'll better handle this alone. And I tried on something they call needle ball and airspeed for instruments, and I never did get proficient at that. But I tried and got into a spiral, which may have been what the Kennedy boy got into up there. He was either in a spiral or a spin. And in a spiral, it's still flying. In a spin, it's stalled out. No control. But on the other, if you can see something, why, you've got control. At any rate, sitting there, fat, dumb, and happy, I just let the thing go on. And I sat there for 10,000 feet coming down, And I'd figured out that if I didn't see ground by, maybe 1,000 feet or a little less, I'd jump. And I didn't want to do that because I didn't know what was below me. I didn't want to hit a school or whatever else. And it kept unwhirling, and I just kept sitting there. And pretty soon it got right at 1,000 feet, and I was reaching for the canopy handle, and I saw a little bit of green. And that's all it took. Down and back to the...
That was because you were disoriented and you couldn't find your... Is that why that's all it took? I mean...
No horizon.
In a configuration like that where you're turning, no. Without instruments, you don't know what to do. You can't... no flying by the seat of your britches.
Could you describe the general flying characteristics of the P-47? What was it like to fly one? What were the strengths and weaknesses?
Well, I don't know of many weaknesses, but in Richmond, we had to go through a bunch of books, reading about it, and this, that, and the other, and then sitting in the cockpit and learning all of it. And instructor strapped himself to the side of the one I was in and ordered me to taxi here and taxi there, and I thought, well, after I've gotten the taxi down, maybe they'll bring out the two-seater and I can learn to fly this dude. Well, I couldn't tell where we were going. I just listened to what he was telling me. Turn left, turn right, stop. And we were kind of out in the middle of the airfield, and he unstraps himself and he says, take it out, make 3 landings, and bring it back. Who, me? Yeah. Well, I was almost lined up, not quite, so I finished lining up, but the engine's up in the way, and it's kind of difficult to make sure you're going straight. You can tell pretty well that you're in the middle of the runway. At any rate, I let it roll a little ways and locked the tail wheel and gave it the power. And it ran and ran and ran. It seemed like forever, because on an AT-6 we'd have been off the ground pretty quick. But here this dude, the tail finally comes up and I can see. And I'm headed slightly at an angle off the runway to the left, down towards the fire engine, on which these guys are sitting on top watching all these funny landings. And as soon as it started skipping a little bit, well, first of all, I tilted it up on the right wheel because the left wheel was running off the runway. You don't like that. And it was still pointed towards the fire engine. And it started to skip, and I knew, well, I wasn't far from flying because you could feel it take off then, and I sucked up the gear just as we went over that fire engine with all these guys jumping off of it. From there, we put in several hours just learning what the thing could do. And our gunnery, I believe we waited on that till we got with our fighter group, and then they set up aerial and ground gunnery targets for us to learn how to shoot. And
what was your impression of the firepower that the P-47 had? I mean, you used to flying trainers, and now you got some with 8 50 cals. What was your first impression when you touched one off? What was that like?
Well, it's kind of hard to say. It's just you got a lot of meanness there.
Yeah.
And I'd hate to see somebody that I'd hit with those.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because I believe it was about 10 rounds per second that it fired. And we would haul over 260 rounds or 300 rounds max.
Wow.
Per gun. But you could use them up, you'd have maybe 20, 25 seconds of firepower.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that'd be it. Do you remember your first, you're a 19-year-old kid, man, you're a pilot, they've just given you a P-47, and they tell you that your mission is to go and look for targets of opportunity.
Oh yeah.
Do you remember your first mission?
I don't remember the first one or the second one. The third one I remember because it was my first dive bombing mission.
Okay.
And everything was lined up and read to us and what we're supposed to hit and so forth, and off we went. And the flight I was in was always the last flight, generally, the third flight. And I was next to last. We get into echelon to the right, most generally, and then the leader would start his run down, and the next guy and the next guy, and one right after the other, dive bombing whatever it was that had been set up as the target. Most generally it was bridges and tanks. And I had turned down and just pointed her down, and there was a flash in the cockpit. And I thought, good Lord, I've been hit. And I started looking all around, couldn't find anything, and looked up front, and here was the bulb out of the gun sight hanging here. A real bright bulb. And I thought, we can't have that. I can't dive bomb without a gun sight. So I stuffed her back up in there and kept going down, and it fell out again. I thought, man, I better get rid of these things, which I did, and pulled up straight up so that the concussion had less to work with than if I was flat. And I was looking for Mac, the flight commander. Couldn't find him. Looked all around, 2 or 3 other guys, and couldn't find him. So I thought, well, let's go back home. I headed it for England. And on my left side, I noticed a ship coming up towards me and was getting ready to get on my wing as a person there. And I thought, there ain't nobody greener than me. I will get on his wing. And I throttled back in order to move in, and he throttled back. I thought, well, he maybe can't go as fast as me, so I throttled back some more. And that dude throttled back some more. So here we sat, you know, just kind of wobbly. I thought, to heck with that, I'm going home. Pretty soon a guy came up and got on this wing. And then another guy got on this guy's wing who was on mine. Another guy came up and got on this guy's wing. 5 of us lost. That's
They're following you.
They're following you.
Yeah, right. At any rate, got back to England, the White Cliffs of Dover, and these guys started peeling off to go to their own base, and pretty soon I was alone. I found the field and landed. But strange things happen.
Did you ever encounter any enemy fighters?
Once. Maxie, we were on a mission headed for France, and I forget what it was, probably just general reconnaissance because I don't recall a target. And the ground controller called in a unidentified at 20,000 feet. One. There was 4 of us. And the group commander turned it over to our squadron turned it over to our flight to go investigate, which we did. We climbed and we climbed and we climbed, and at 20,000 feet we didn't see anything, and we kept climbing some more, and at 27,000 feet I noticed in the distance there was some bogies, and about that time the radio button clicked. You can hear it click before they start talking. And he says, there's 12 bogies, 12 o'clock level. And I was counting them at the same time, and there were 12 there all right, but 13 more below the horizon. 25. And we were 4. They came and they made a circle and a half around us. And just as the leader was getting ready to come in for a firing run, I don't know, that may have been where I got my BVDs scorched a little. But we dropped tanks and pointed them straight down, and nothing could keep up with the jug. And at 20,000 feet, I had started in the dive at 27. At 20,000, I was checking the clocks on the dashboard, And everything seemed all right until I got over to engine pressure. And I think in the 50s was the highest it's supposed to go, and I was in the 70s.
Was it because of the dive you were in?
Yeah. At 500, at 20,000, I was indicating 500 miles per hour.
Wow.
Now, I understand that in order to get your true ground speed, you've got to take that figure and multiply it by 3% per 1,000 feet, up to 10,000 feet. And then above that, it's 1% per 1,000 feet that you add to it. So he's moving along pretty good. Mm-hmm. And we got our way back home. There's nothing else much to that.
Was that a common tactic that the P-47s could employ if they had to bug out from a situation, was to dive?
Yeah.
Okay.
And I wanted, I was hoping, of course we'd never discussed it in the flight, but I was thinking that if each of the four of us got in kind of a diamond or whatever, and everybody made a left turn at the same time, full throttle and everything else, and started meeting them head on, I would have been willing to try that.
Because of the firepower and armor protection?
Yeah. But 25 is probably a little rough.
What planes were they? Were they any 109s or?
190s.
They were really?
Yeah.
Could you, it's kind of well known that the P-47 was an excellent gun platform for dive bombing. What made the P-47 so successful at that role?
Well, the thing I think helped it, of course it had a 2,300 horsepower engine, but it had an elliptical wing. It was shaped kind of like the Spitfire, kind of rounded. It wasn't just straight. And I think that's what gave them their abilities above 20,000 feet compared to other aircraft. That wing helped.
Now, you mentioned a number of targets that you would go after, including bridges, tanks, whatnot. Was there a target that was more difficult to take out than others?
You hated to cross airfields because they generally had a lot of ack-ack around there, and we lost several guys. We'd line abreast, and the whole bunch would go across this airfield at the same time. And a guy in our flight got killed. His name was Duke. And I think another one or two got killed out of the group. It was a group mission, not just squadron.
What about the heavier German tanks like the Tigers? Did you encounter those, and how difficult were those to take out?
I really don't know. We received the Presidential Unit Citation for taking out a bunch of tanks not long after D-Day. There was a bunch of them headed back towards Normandy. And we had several trips that day to take care of them. And they tell us that if a bomb hits the tank, the guys inside are gone because of concussion and whatnot. So otherwise, some of them looked like they had behind the hatches little round outfits I thought might be gasoline or something. And you could come in from the back also and bounce 50s off the ground up to where their air came in, and that would sometimes stop them. But it was just whatever they wanted us to do, we did. And a while back I heard that there was a retired German soldier from that period here talking with people. And he says, yes, he said, every time I got to where I could see out there was a P-47.
What they called them Yabos was their nickname for it.
Yeah.
You mentioned the third mission, which of course was memorable because your bomb site kind of crapping out on you and people calling you back. Were there other missions that you remember that stick out after all this time?
How about the story about McGuire? The fellow you gave the piggyback ride?
Oh. Well, yeah, this flight I was telling you about where we ran into 25 of them, pointed straight down. You had to watch and not overpower your engine because you blow cylinders. And just after I'd pulled the throttle back, I'd chopped the water. I looked down and Mac was quite a bit ahead of me, but I saw him start streaming white smoke. Well, that was oil. And going in, we'd seen a strip under construction in the British sector, and a little single deal, and they had graded off part of it, and you had just brown dirt in a line. And I went down and I chased one of these little compactors or steamrollers, we used to call them, off the runway, and they finally got off. Their officer, each time I went down and made a turn to come in, he kept motioning me off, don't do this. He was smart. At any rate, I had my flaps down, my gear down, and I picked the right side of the runway. In training, you were taught to pick one side or the other, never land in the middle of the runway. And I landed in the right side, and everything was fine. Got down to the end and turned her around pretty quick because the field was a little short. And I crawled out, and the major came over and says, "Do you need oil?" "No." "Do you need petrol?" "No." Says, we aren't open for this sort of thing yet. And I said, well, it looks like we just opened it, because my flight commander, who was coming out of the woods about that time, had crashed there. And we chatted a little bit, and I told Maxie, I said, well, we're right here at the coast, and I'm sure you can get a ride back on a boat. He says, to hell with that noise, I'm riding back with you. Well, it's a single seat aircraft, and he was a big guy. And I hated to ask, but I had to ask. I says, do you want to fly? And he says, no, you fly. Oh boy, that helped a lot, because he was big. I'd have been squished. And got back home, and there wasn't too much said about it, as I recall.
Well, whenever you mentioned earlier, whenever you had targets and you had a thick cloud cover, and once in a while you'd see a hole in the cloud cover, how did you navigate to know where you were, to know that that was the right town you were supposed to be at?
Well, that's why I called for the second shot, and I told him, I said, look, all these little towns look the same to me, and I want to make sure we get the one that you want us to get. But otherwise, the maps I had did have railroads on it. And as those little holes went by, I stuck to the railroad, waiting for the next hole. And when it came up to where they crossed, I turned, because the town was right up here that we were going to. St. Vith is where it turned, and Prüm was the little town that we were to knock out this building. So you can get along. Mm-hmm. But if it had been 100%,
Wow.
It's probably 99.99.
Some of the targets that you strafed, you told me on the phone, you mentioned you hit a train one time. What was it like whenever you take out some of these, I think it was a train or some building you said that had something in it, and it went. What was it like strafing some of these, inanimate objects, essentially, that
Yeah. Well, because you don't know where the people are that were in it. They try to take cover. Mm-hmm. But we were on a mission, and I was leading our flight. And I noticed, I forget how high we were, but I think it's around 12 thou, maybe. And on a road, they had the trees that grew up along each side of their roads over there. And I saw three trucks. The middle one was hauling a small cannon. And I radioed the CO, the commander, and says, there's 3 trucks down there. Can I go get them? Yeah, I said, take it easy. I kept bugging him. Finally he said, all right, go ahead. And my wingman, who was new on the job, we went down. He stayed on my wing, but straightened out for a strafing run, and he says, I can't see him. Whew, my word. And he said that 2 or 3 times as we were approaching the firing point. And I said, well, you move it in to me as close as you can and keep the same elevation and movements that I do. And when you see him going, you turn on, fire your guns. So the one I was aiming at was the middle one, because I thought it might have ammo for the cannon that it was hauling. And it did, and it blew. And I never did see that film. The guys that did see it said, we thought the stuff had got you. It blew up.
So you flew through the fireball? And
I was above it. It has a 2-second overrun. When you quit firing, it'll go on the camera for 2 seconds. And by that time I was pulling up, and that was about the time the mushroom, I guess, started coming up. And I went over the top of it.
What happened to all that camera footage? Did they write over the tapes, or did they store it somewhere? Do you know what they did with that?
No, because there's 2 or 3 of mine. A lot of it gets stolen. And a lot of the stuff the guys were bringing back from the war in their foot lockers, souvenirs and whatnot, were stolen. My getting ready to come home, I was rooming, there was another captain in this room, and we were being prepared for departure. And they were going to make an inspection, and I knew my folks had never tasted champagne. And in my footlocker, I put 6 bottles of champagne. And this captain comes through, and of course I'm a captain also, but you don't try to outrank. But his job was to make sure you're not taking stuff home that should be left there or might get in trouble at home. And I guess champagne was one of them, or else he made it up himself. And he said, yeah, you can't take that with you. So what in the world are we going to do with it? He said, well, you can give it to me. My roommate and I looked at each other and says, we're going to drink it. And we did. By the next day, we had it all gone.
wow.
It's the things happen that you don't realize happened. Before we got on the ship, there was showers. It looked like a warehouse with showers down the sides, and it was British. And up at the front end was a great big brass valve with brass chain and brass rings, and they adjusted that thing for the water temperature. One way it'd get it too hot, the other way it'd get it too cold, so they would adjust it just right. Well, it seemed like the guys had been in there long and long enough, and a little red-headed guy in front of me got PO'd, reached up and got the cold handle and pulled it down. Well, as the cold water went down the sides, you could just see them popping out of the showers. Oh, Lord, it was kind of pitiful. But then they put us on the ship, as the Ile de France, or however you pronounce it, and something similar happened, and it actually happened. I was in the John shaving or doing something, and some guy's standing there with a paper towel, and he put some lighter fluid on it. Well, the Johns on the ships, there were 6 of them lined up against the wall, and you didn't flush them. They had water running all the time through them. So this guy lit this, and one of the stools wasn't occupied, and he drops her down in there, and the water starts down the line, and you never saw the like of action.
That's pretty good.
I thought they'd kill him, but they didn't.
What did you do to get the Distinguished Flying Cross? What was your mission?
It was the mission I was telling you about with the railroads and the nearly 100% rain.
Oh,
rain, clouds.
And that was in Battle of the Bulge, roughly around that time?
It's probably north of the Bulge.
You said
a
it's St.
little bit.
Vith area?
St. Vith, and then up to Prum, P-R-U-M. Prum.
Where were you when the war ended?
Beg pardon?
Where were you when the war ended?
Home.
Oh.
They'd sent me back from overseas and sent me out to Santa Ana Army Air Base. And my aunt and uncle were living out there, and he was a sergeant in the First Motion Picture Unit. So I'm sure he worked on a lot of the films that we saw in the service. And she was a photo retoucher at Warner Brothers. And one day he said, well, let's show him parts of Warner Brothers. And away we went, walking along, saw Peter Lorre on a dealie and another guy. And we came to an area where there were a bunch of guys in their pinks and greens, officers' uniforms, the pink uppers and the green uppers and the pink trousers, we called them. And they must be on a break. At any rate, we were kind of up against the wall out of the way, and the director or somebody said something, and they all started moving away. And one of them started over towards us, his assistant maybe, and he reached out to him and says, no, that's a real one.
Well, looking back, what was probably your most harrowing mission? What was the most, harrowing point that you experienced on your missions or as a pilot during the war?
Well, I guess the one, and it must have been an error or something, because they had me leading the group, 3 squadrons. And as I recall, it was just a case of going out to find something. At any rate, I saw a tree in the middle of a road, and I figured that wasn't right, and got to looking closer, and there were all kinds of tanker trucks and tanks in this forest there. And the other squadron, there are 3 squadrons, and I kept one of them high in case the Germans were going to come in with aircraft. And it was headed up by Lieutenant Colonel, and I was a second lieutenant. And he kept wanting to come down. I said, no, you stay up there. And finally he says, to hell with it. He came down anyway, which is, I guess, all right. But I don't like to play with fate where you're supposed to know what you're doing. But I was making passes at whatever was on the ground, and my wingmen were also following me. And I probably made a total of 4 passes, but along about the second pass, I kept hearing something that sounded like little hail on a tin roof, just sort of muffled. And I didn't pay any attention to it. I was still after that truck, but I couldn't see it through the trees too well, because I was at about treetop level doing maybe 300. And I kept hearing that noise, and each time I came around and started in the firing run, why, I heard it again. So on the 4th time, I looked out, and again at treetop level, there were tracers starting down here and probably underneath, and came up around this way and around down over here, under here. And not one shell hit my airplane, and I don't know how many hundred were fired.
So that sound you were hearing, was that actually, so that none of that was hitting your plane, you were just hearing the pops from the guns going off?
Well, it is more likely the sound made by the bullet going through the air.
Ah. Wow. So what was that? Was it a mobile artillery piece that you were trying to take out? You said it looked like a tree in the road.
Mine, no, I was after a truck. There was a, I guess it was a tank, off to my right and back a little bit, but the other guys were taking care of it.
Wow.
So, after you came home, how would you say your experiences in World War II affected the rest of your life? How did it change your outlook relative to the person you were when you joined the service?
Well, in the first place, when I went from Nashville down to Montgomery, and Nashville had started a big building rush because we were in the war, and they were just starting to get people and starting to get stuff built, and there was a lot of dirt work going on with your equipment, trucks and whatnot. And I got down to Maxwell Field, and I was down there about a month, and I came down with what I thought might have been pneumonia, and it was pitiful. And I didn't go to sick call because I thought they might throw me out. And I got sicker and sicker. And normally, along about 2:30 in the afternoon, a fever would start, and it would build until I went to bed, and it'd break during the night. And the next morning, no temperature. I mean, no fever. And I went ahead anyway to the medic call around 8 o'clock of the morning. And I did that twice, and all they did was shove a thermometer in my mouth, says, quit your loafing. So I waited till it was after 2:30 the next afternoon, and along about 3 or 4 o'clock. Went back to the orderly room and told him the situation, that I'd had this stuff, but it didn't show up on sick call. And he sort of ho-hummed and got a thermometer and stuck it into my mouth. Pulled it out, did a double take. And said, from here you go directly to the hospital. Don't go by the barracks. If you need anything, we'll get it for you. But he knew right then that I was sick. And that stuff reoccurred in primary. And it reoccurred a little later on. I think before I was in the group. And then it occurred while I was in the group. It occurred while I was overseas, and I spent close to 2 months in a hospital there in England. And still flying missions and whatnot in between. Because they would say, well, we've got him cured, the fever's gone away. Come to find out, it was called nocardia, and it was kin to tuberculosis, although it's not transmitted that way. It's transmitted from dirt. And that was where I got it with all that going on up in Nashville. And it stayed with me the rest of my life up until 2002, when a young doctor over here, a lung specialist, found out what it was. And my pill doctor, the lung doctor, put my pill doctor on it to find something to kill it. And he put me on an antibiotic for a full year because he said this stuff is hard to kill. And a lot of doctors have never seen it and don't know what it is. And yet all through my life I'd have these occurrences and, well, it's pneumonia, and give me a penicillin boost. And the differences between when it happened varied. And I never could call it for sure when it was going to happen.
So you had this your whole life?
Yeah. I'd wanted to be an aeronautical engineer, and in spring of '45, a little after when I got home and out of the service, I applied to go to school and was accepted. And the first quarter, I was doing fine until this damn stuff hit again, and knocked me out to where I had to change majors because of the time elements of all the other stuff to get them coordinated to where you get a degree. And I went after that just for the heck of it to say I had one rather than aeronautical engineering, which is what I wanted.
So some people carry mental baggage from the war. You carried an actual physical disease, it sounded like.
I did, yes.
Do you think you got it during the military, or do you think this is something you may have picked up before you went in?
No. Because while I was at the second place where it originated, started being mean, my doctor came in one morning. He was a first lieutenant, and all the other doctors were captains. So I don't know why. At any rate, I could see him as he turned the corner and he put on a smile. I thought, what? He says, he said, we're here trying to find out what this stuff is you guys got. Said there's 300 of you with whatever this is, and you are closer to being well than any of the others, and would you volunteer for a spinal tap to see if that might help us find out what it is? Well, having in mind 2 or 3 medals of honor and a silver star or 2, I thought, why, sure. And they did, and it didn't. They couldn't tell. They still didn't know. And as this young fella here in town said, he said, well, most doctors have never seen it. And they wouldn't know it probably if they saw it.
How did your experiences in the war affect you? As far as, aside from the affliction that you got, how did it affect you after the war? I mean, how did your experiences affect you?
Well, I don't know how to answer that. It's just that you go on, and try to get along. I went ahead and finished the school and got my degree, but it wasn't what I wanted. And it didn't help.
Well, we appreciate you allowing us to interview today, and I was just wondering if there's anything you'd like to add that we haven't covered so far that we may have missed.
Gee, I can't think of it unless one thing I think I will dwell on a little bit. It's amazing how many young guys they had, and I was 20 all through 1944, D-Day and all of that, and was a captain, if you can imagine that.
Yeah, I picked up on that when you said you were a captain leading that flight, or you were second lieutenant then, but you were a captain when they took your champagne bottles away.
Yeah.
And you're pretty young.
Yeah.
To be captain.
Yeah, it's hard to believe.
Yeah.
But before going in, or maybe after I'd gone in a little bit, I'd heard that some of the ground crew were a little PO'd that the flyers got so much money. That's and rank.
What was your relationship like with the ground crew?
Fine.
Good.
They were good guys. Yeah. And I can't remember their names.
Did you have like a set crew of guys who always, so you knew who they were then?
Yeah. Yeah, radio man, crew chief oversaw the whole thing, and the engine man and armament man. You had about 4 or 5 guys per car, per plane.
And they kept them going.
Yeah.
What's probably your fondest memory of being in World War II and in the military?
Well, perhaps maybe my travels, places I'd heard of, London, Paris, that sort of thing. It's kind of interesting.
Okay. Well, that concludes the interview. Unless you have anything else to add.
I can't at the moment. When you reach my age, it doesn't exactly come back
Well, we've used an hour of tape, so
quick enough.
So it's about perfect. We've used up all the tape, and I'd like to reiterate what I said earlier. We appreciate you guys allowing us into your house and interviewing you for the Veterans History Project.
Well, we thank you for keeping credit with the wheels in D.C.
All right. Well, thanks for your time. We appreciate it.
You're more than welcome here.